All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. I see people are still joining our call, so maybe let's just wait for a minute or two, and then we will kick off our webinar for this morning. For the meantime, while waiting for our few colleagues, I see people are still joining in. Kindly use the chat box. Feel free to introduce yourself. From which country are you joining in for today's webinar? And then add in your organization. Yeah, while waiting for other colleagues to join in. We will start in few seconds. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on CVA Climate and Environment Communities of Practice. And yeah, welcome and thank you very much for your time for joining our webinar for today. Next slide, please. So this is the fifth webinar of the Communities of Practice on CVA Climate and Environment. So yeah, and thank you very much for those colleagues who consistently are joining our webinar for the Communities of Practice. Just for the information of everyone, you feel free to join and maximize the resources that we have in the Communities of Practice. You can find resources on the Communities of Practice and Cash Climate Environment in the COP website. So feel free to reach out and look for the resources on that. For today's webinar is a bit special because we are joined in by this webinar is co-hosted by the DEC and Climate Charter. And so as we all know, COP29 in Baku concluded in November 2024. And as we all know, COP is the most important climate decision forum whose agreements and commitments can have potential huge impact to the people most affected by climate change. But the question is, what's next? So together for this webinar, we will be discussing, and together with the panelists, they will highlight what they regard as the key successes and remaining challenges after the Baku COP29, which are focus on with a focus on what this means to the humanitarian sector, including in relation to relevant climate charter commitments. Next slide, please. Yeah, so since this is a webinar, there you should see a Q&A box, so feel free to type in your questions, and together with the panelists we will answer your questions, and feel free to put in your questions as we go along with the presentations and question and answer from our panelists. You are muted, but feel free to raise your hands if you have questions. Today we have yeah, so the webinar will be English, and then we will be all together for at least 90 minutes, and we will maximize the time that we have for this webinar. Yeah, and again, yeah, thank you very much for your time. And then I'll hand over to Frances for the framing of the charter and webinar.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, really warm welcome from the DEC. We're really delighted to be collaborating with the CARP Network and with the Climate and Environment Charter today for this webinar. And this is not only an opportunity to reflect on the outcomes of the COP together, but also to link to an exploration of how we as a sector can better meet the commitments of the Climate and Environment Charter, and so respond to climate and environmental crises effectively and consistently. So today we are framing our discussion within the context of the Climate and Environment Charter, as the Charter came about as a means to ensure our sector's commitment to do our part, work together, and ensure that our actions reduce the impact of the crises and convince others to do the same. And so while everyone, as we know, is impacted by climate change, not everyone is affected equally. And those who have contributed least to the crises are hit hardest and are often excluded from climate and environmental action. And as organizations working in conflict, complex, fragile, and disaster-prone contexts, and with growing humanitarian needs compounded by climate change and environmental degradation, it was evident that as a humanitarian sector, we really needed to step up our response and help people adapt to the impacts of climate and environmental crises. Can I have the next slide, please? So up to date, 453 organizations have signed up to the Charter, and these are just a few of them, and you might see your names amongst those. And the Charter really stems from the recognition that we as a humanitarian sector need to act collectively, and that we have a responsibility not only to respond to humanitarian consequences of these crises, but we also have a responsibility to reduce the environmental impact of our own actions. Next slide, please. So why is COP important to us as humanitarian actors? The COP offers a unique opportunity to put both commitments 5 and 6 of the Charter into action, since they speak to working collaboratively and across the humanitarian sector and beyond to strengthen climate and environmental action and to use our influence to mobilize urgent and more ambitious climate action and environmental protection. And in this post-COP session, we will discuss to what extent COP29 was an effective forum for influencing ambitious and concrete action. And we also will look towards COP30, which offers continued opportunities to actors across the humanitarian development, climate, environment, and peace-building sectors to come together and advocate for ambitious and concrete action. So as Michael has mentioned, the 29th Conference of Parties took place in November in Baku, in Azerbaijan, with hopes of raising ambition for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And key decisions were on the table, such as adopting the new collective quantified goal and fully operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund and the Santiago Network, advancing on the mitigation work programme and the global goal on adaptation, the global stocktake, and the just transition work programmes, among others. And the COP29 presidency agenda also included the thematic day on peace and relief and recovery. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to you, Celine, to introduce our panelists, and really looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Frances. So yes, today we have a great panelist again with us. So I hope you will enjoy the discussion. So we have Mary Koska from Action Against Hunger. I'm sorry for the typo, and also part of the Climate Action Network. We have Hari Krishna with us from LPage International. We have Isabel Pelli from Give Directly, and we have Nimo Hassan from the Somali NGO Consortium, but also part of board of IGVA. I will present them right before they take the floor, and I suggest for the sake of time and making sure that we have enough time to really enter the discussion, to go to the panel and quit the slide so you will see the panelist properly. So I will first go to you, Mary. You are the advocacy analyst on food system and climate crisis, Action Against Hunger. You attend the COP and the climate intersection each year as one of the coordinators for agriculture in the Climate Action Network International, sorry. And you are also involved with the UNFCCC, engage in all food policy space, including one with FAO. And first of all, I really want for you to give us a bit of a view of what did you see as the key success at that COP 29 in Baku, but also the challenges that you still foresee. And I want to have your unique perspective as a member of the Climate Action Network and also on the lead of all the agriculture agro question from the NCQG.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. So on the question, what success, I have to admit we have little success to show for, but maybe to mention one, let's say that the humanitarian community becomes much more visible at COP, and it means something, and we can talk about this later, but otherwise, we can say that this COP in Baku, because it was really revolving around climate finance, really was not a success. And the outcome we have to show for with only 300 billion negotiated as the core of the NCQG is far too low. And as the Climate Action Network, we qualified this outcome as a betrayal and a sign that rich countries in the global north refuse to pay their climate debt. Some economists have even underlined that this 300 billion is not even an increase in commitment for climate finance given the inflation at global level. So this is really disappointing. This is even scandalous, or let's use strong words. And also what was really weak in this outcome is the precise language around this 300 billion of climate finance. There is no guarantee that this will be provision of climate finance in a non-debt inducing manner. So no commitments for 100% grants and the core of public finance. So this is a mobilization goal, and this can include also private funds. And we know that this is not what is needed, especially for adaptation and let alone for loss and damage, for example. About loss and damage, it's also not included as a sub-goal in the NCQG, which was something that we were asking for. And the human rights guarantees in the language of the decision are very weak as well. Even if at some point we had a very good paragraph on human rights, but it got deleted over the course of the very tense last hours of negotiations. So that's kind of the picture and the analysis of the outcome we have of COP29. Now there is also a roadmap Baku to Belém to precise a bit what, for example, on access for this climate finance, and discussions will be ongoing. So we have to continue monitoring this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie. Yes, a bit depressing sketch that you give to us. I still, as an optimistic person, keep your success very close to me, that we have humanitarian actors seen there. And I know that some other humanitarian actor were there too. So I will pass the floor to Isabelle for the next question. So Isabelle Pelé is a specialist and a thought leader on cash transfer with over 15 years working on the topic. Her experience spans program design and delivery with NGO, driving sector-wide change through the CALP network, and most recently leading the DG ECO, cash policy and programming. Now, Isabelle is at Give Directly, sector influencing work, focusing on catalyzing the volume of direct cash transfer to people living in extreme poverty and on the front line of climate change. So I know that you were at the COP too. Isabel, do you share a bit the view of Mari on what's going on at the COP? What are, according to you, your different point of view, the success and the challenge that you foresee? Yeah, give it a bit of that.
Thanks a lot, Celine. Great to be here. I definitely concur with with everything that Marie has just said. But I think given the framing of your question was what do you see as some of the successes, what I've tried to do is to take a slightly more positive slant on things, given that overall, very concerning background. So I'll just talk a little bit about loss. For this intervention, I'll focus on loss and damage. First looking at it in general, and then looking at it from a cash lens in particular. I think despite the disappointing outcome in terms of the NCQG, I felt that there was really a strong focus on community-led loss and damage and quite a united civil society voice in that respect, backed by lots of examples of effective community-led programming that were kind of showcased throughout the events over the 2 weeks at COP. And I think a lot of that is down to really strong advocates kind of convening that work. So just to name a few, the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, Harjeet Singh as well, who's really kind of convened a lot of these civil society initiatives, as well as the loss and damage collaboration. And then I also want to call out the catalytic effect of Scottish Government funding, who funded pilots of loss and damage programming, for example, with Give Directly and Trocare in Malawi or Oxfam in Kenya. I think they've really built a proof of concept. And so in turn, that's also helped build confidence amongst the board of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, both those from the Global North and the Global South. And yes, of course, it is highly disappointing we don't have this sub-goal. However, I saw some kind of emerging discussions about other potential funding sources for loss and damage. So, for example, a potential carbon levy on global shipping, which is apparently quite advanced, and maybe others know more about it, but quite advanced in terms of kind of a decision, and that could generate between 40 and 60 billion a year starting, or being operationalized from next year. And I think, the fact that we're building the case on what loss and damage could look like can help influence these new funding sources. So just to zoom in quickly then on cash, I think, so what Give Directly did is we led the first large cash transfer program for loss and damage in response to Cyclone Freddy in Malawi. And we documented this in a case study and developed a set of principles building on this learning. And I led an event at COP to build buy-in for these principles. And that received really strong endorsement from senior members of the government of Malawi and to the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage board members who were all panelists. And I think where cash is unique as a tool for loss and damage in particular, and then I can talk later about it for other climate objectives, but I think it cuts across the debates between direct access by governments and community access. So ultimately, whether it's delivered through social protection systems or through civil society, the principles of efficiency, effectiveness, flexibility remain the same. So we argue, and I really believe that it's the most localized mechanism for channeling climate finance. And just to say that the kind of points on loss and damage, on cash for loss and damage, which particularly resonated with our panelists and the board members in particular around efficiency, the transformative nature of cash, of large cash, and the fact that they gave you the agency for recipient-led response rather than kind of expert-assessed needs, and being able to respond to economic and non-economic losses. I'll stop there for now, and I'll just share the case study and the principles in the chat, because they're now on the CALP library. Thanks.
Yeah, amazing to share that in the chat. So I also get the point that you definitely agree with Mari on maybe not at the level that you expected of a success from that COP, definitely, but still some good things that we can take over. I hear a lot about the community focus, the localized mechanism, and for that we have another amazing panelist to speak a bit more on that. So Nimo, I will come to you. You have over 15 years of experience in both humanitarian and development programming. You are currently the lead of the Somali NGO Consortium, and which is a coordination mechanism of NGOs for NGOs. And you are co-chairing the YAS Result Group 1 subgroup on localization I'm sorry, so much was in that complicated for me. You're also co-chairing the steering group on the YASK guidance on strengthening participation, representation, and leadership of local and national actors in the YASK humanitarian coordination mechanism. And we are delighted to have you with us today. And I really want to see from your unique perspective of local and national civil society, what did you see as success, challenges about that COP, and what we can take for country and community level?
Thank you very much and good morning. Yeah, no, I actually, everything that my panelists have said so far resonates with me. There are a lot of disappointments in terms of, especially when this COP was a finance COP, right? So that is, I think, the underlining factor for disappointment in terms of what the conclusion were, what countries who are affected by climate shocks were asking for, and countries who should be paying their debts because they're the ones who polluted they're the ones who got us to where we are now. But I also share the sentiments that there are a lot more visibility, even if it just means visibility from diverse representation of civil society, including local actors. Maybe just quickly to say and what we are and what we do. Yes, we're a forum of NGOs, for NGOs, both international and local actors. And we have various different platforms to convene our various and diverse members. And one group is our Climate Change Adaptation Resilience Working Group, where we sort of come together, learn from each other, have common messaging and have advocacy. And this year, we actually produced a common messaging for specifically geared towards the COP. That was sort of done in consultation with various different stakeholders, including academia, private sector. That was in line with the National Adaptation Plan as well of the Somali government. We had 4 key messages. It's on the Climate Charter. We're a signatory to the Climate Charter as well, so it's on the Climate Charter website. It's also on Relief website. We had 4 key messages that we wanted to bring to COP. One was climate financing must be fair, adequate, and timely. So speaking to the frustrations that Maria has outlined. And message 2 was countries at the climate and conflict nexus face unique challenges and require unique considerations. We talk about a lot that this is required, but it's not materializing in terms of, obviously, we need to put money where our mouth is. So that substantive, life-changing financing isn't coming through. And then key message, the third message was inclusive climate adaptation investments needs to be prioritized for these countries with low adaptive capacity, including Somalia. And then high carbon emission countries must support low carbon emission countries to future-proof their economies for climate change and mitigation. And with the 3 billion, that is with inflation, as Maria said, that would look quite dim if you look at it of what's coming out from this particular COP. However, as civil society, we need to push, we need to maintain, we need to collaborate and build coalitions. We need to speak even louder than we have already done. So our job is just getting more difficult, I think. And although we're disappointed, I don't think we should lose hope. So being hopeful is important. And keep going the fight, and not only at the COP itself, but the lead up to the COP. So I think there are various opportunities and platforms that we can ensure that we are collaborating and amplifying each other's voices. For me, the loss and damage conversation, I think is progressing. It's not progressing well. I mean, the word operationalization of loss and damage fund becomes I read it somewhere that is in success, for me, operationalization means it's actually when it's working for the people that in need, when it's reaching to the people in need. So we need to keep pushing and keep sharing those great examples that my previous colleague has shared, and ensure that we're amplifying where there are successes and where things are actually improving for communities, and ensuring that we're keeping governments accountable, whether it's the local governments and in the local countries where in countries where we work. So for us, will be the Somalia government. Recently, there was an announcement. There's 100 million climate financing for Somalia for the first time. So we need to ensure that we're engaging with that process as humanitarians, as ones on the ground who are already doing a lot of the work, to ensure that if we're not, our intention is not just to get the funding. I mean, of course, that would help, but ensure that we are sharing expertise and experiences and learning what's been learned from the humanitarian context. And we need to keep the conversation going internally, but also externally. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Nimo. Yeah, I definitely see what you are going. You have some question popping up, so definitely some interest around that. And I see how much civil society that the center of everything around that everything is more complicated, because it's not really a success that we can wait for that. So I want to move to our next panelist, Ari, who will unpack that a little bit too. So Ari is a global climate change and aging advisor with LPage International. He has over 2 decades of experience in climate change, sustainability, and HDP nexus. And Ari, so a bit different question, because we definitely now see that mitigating success, mostly a challenging COP, but what do you expect now for maybe the next one to place greater emphasis on the inclusion of indigenous population? What are the perspective and insight on the role they can play in addressing the climate challenge? I think Nimo touched base a bit on that, but maybe to see a bit more, and how can the civil society organization and humanitarian actor and development actor ensure that the voice and the knowledge system are effectively represented in the decision-making process. Back to you, Ari. You're on mute.
Thank you, Celine, and thanks to everyone who is here, and thanks for having me in this very important discussion. So just to reflect on previous panelists, what they said, I think I just want to make one point before moving on to the focus on indigenous communities, expected focus. I would say that the greatest success of this COP29 was the logistics. So I will stop there, and remaining most of the other things were said by other panelists, so I will not go there. But it is expected, actually, there is no official confirmation that COP30 will have a good focus on indigenous communities or not. But it was a desire expressed by the president of Brazil, because this COP30 is going to take place in the Amazon region, which is known for vibrant indigenous communities presence. So let's hope that the focus will be there, and the focus will be meaningful. It is not just symbolic, because as you know that indigenous communities are frontline defenders of ecosystem all over the world, with their traditional knowledge systems, sustainable approaches to resource management, conservation, and also their genuine climate adaptation and resilience capacities. And their practices in many countries, such as rotational farming, forest management, water conservation, they provide low carbon community-based solutions to climate change challenges. This is what we are trying to promote with those $300 billion that were expected to, was promised, and we expect that to be realized every year. So these practices are already there, the indigenous communities are providing. So, but to what extent the indigenous communities, the knowledge and will be used or applied in in the in the future COP policies decision making system, we don't know. But if you look at COP29, we have a very little of mention of the indigenous communities. Of course, COP29 was supposed to be branded to be the finance COP, but finance for who? I think finance for communities like this should also have been discussed thoroughly and sufficiently. And what I have seen is that just indigenous communities were paraded in few special events, that's all, but not so substantial discussion or decisions that are on the indigenous communities. Let's hope that COP30 will not be like this. What I would see that if it is going to be the focus, let's hope it will be the focus. There should be substantial representation of indigenous communities at the decision-making level. This must be mobilized and realized through civil society involvement. Indigenous leaders must be promoted to become the important parties into these climate negotiations. They should be involved. Their voices should be taken seriously, and their comments or their inputs should be placed in the drafts that are that are going to be discussed, and ultimately their wisdom has to be recorded in the decision making drafts and all. This is the way I think uh, real tribute one can pay to the indigenous communities' knowledge, and also the contributions that they are making into keeping this climate safer, at least in some parts of the world. So I'll stop here, and I'll get back later if there are any questions on that.
Thank you so much, Ari, for this insight. And now I will come back to Mari again, because we were discussing a lot that Baku COP was supposed to finalize the one. It was supposed to be the financing COP. We mentioned that quite a lot already, but maybe can you unpack a bit more what was there? What are some of the challenges and outcomes that the text gets around the financing, and what does it mean for us as the humanitarian and development sector on the next part? And if you can touch about the new collective quantified goal, sorry, the loss and damage fund, of course, the adaptation one will be amazing for everyone to have a bit more views on that.
This question to me, Celine?
No, it was to Mari. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. All right.
But
Okay.
feel free after Mari to jump in if
Sure.
you want to add anything, Ari.
No, I'm more eager to listen to Mary.
Yeah, okay. So I already gave a kind of an evaluation of what we have in the NCQG, and so what it means for the humanitarian and development community, I would say, is to look in the Baku to Belém roadmap, so in the dialogue that will continue on access to that finance, where we can have a political hook to talk more about the fragile and conflict affected settings, for example. So I was saying the humanitarian community is much more visible, and this is very positive because we see that conflict settings, fragile contexts, etc., they are getting more attention at COP, in side events, in statements, but we haven't managed so far to get it translated in actual political outcomes so that finance is accessible also to these contexts. And so it's been mentioned across negotiation streams, and even in the NCQG at some point, there was a mention of fragile and conflict affected states, but it didn't make it in the final negotiated text. There are also mentions of locally led approaches and direct access. So we have to see how all these political signals can be translated in actual ways for these humanitarian contexts to get funding because they desperately need it. It's 1/4 of the global population living in conflict affected areas. So this is maybe one possibility for the humanitarian community to focus on. But we will have a lot of challenges, as I was saying, because the NCQG has not managed to be framed in a way that we have a core of public grants-based finance. And a lot will be also a mobilization of public-private partnership, for example. We know that this type of private finance is absolutely not feasible for our contexts. And there is an actual risk with private finance seeking a return on investment, that there is an exploitation of vulnerabilities in conflict settings, for example. So all of this has to be taken into account in the way we are looking at the issue in the future.
Okay, and so maybe just for persons who are not fully involved in the COP and following from far, so it was expected that it's the cycle of financing will be over with that COP. Do you think it should continue with your Baku to Belém roadmap or thing like that? Do you think it's foreseen it will be part of the next discussion, or maybe born or anything? What is your view around that?
So there still will be a continuing dialogue through the roadmap on access to finance. And anyway, finance is the mother of all fights, so it will continue. It's a fight for a time frame of 15 years at least. So we will definitely still have discussions about finance. All the colleagues said that civil society has to still push, because we saw that Baku didn't deliver. So we cannot just give up now and well, there probably will not be a renegotiation of this NTQG, or not until 2035. So that's in a long time. But there will be continued discussions on finance, and with our pressure, maybe we can also get some of the bad sides of the outcomes to be, at least to have the worst impacts of these private finance flows, etc., mitigated with strong guarantees on human rights and strong possibilities of access for local communities.
Sorry, thank you so much, Mari. It's definitely clearer. So this cycle is over because NTQGs are now there. The way they are, we have to use them like that. But the finance part will continue even if they have some agreement of amount, etc. And that's something that we can continue to engage and should continue to engage, especially, you say, not only on the amount, but also on the quality of the funding, if I get you right. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So maybe I now go to Nimo. So based on those different discussion, what do you foreseen for the next COP? What are your expectation, and how you hope to mobilize the Somali CSO around that?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, thank you, Marie, for sharing that. I was just noting down the next cycle of negotiation of the NCQ goal 2035. But I think also it's important to continue to track how much is that the 3 billion is actually getting round to the communities who need it. So for us at the Somali NGO Consortium, and looking forward to the COP30, and I like the roadmap Baku to Belém. I like that. I think we'll be using that a bit more. Is to better organize ourselves as NGOs, as local NGOs, as civil society organizations, For us, I don't know if I mentioned this, but our COP engagement started in Dubai, so last year. So we're fairly new to this COP conversation as a network, as a fora. I'm sure the INGOs and the local NGOs have engaged in different levels individually, but within the forum, this last year was our first year. This is our second year, so we're getting better prepared and understanding and navigating through all of these various different conversations, all very important. But one of the key messages that we want to take forward to COP30 is that all of these conversations, whether humanitarian, climate finance, and development, converge at the community level. That is the common denominator, and that's where we need to strengthen our efforts in advocating, but our complementarity in actually delivering the interventions. And a lot more so with, looking at the geopolitics right now, there are a lot more people in need. That need is increasing, it's not reducing. So I think that's one of the key messages. For us, we need to ensure that we are talking, building coalitions internally in country. I also hope to see a more intentional efforts to aggressively match the financing requirements as assessed in the global stock take, matching the pledges and the investments. I also expect to see parties demonstrating much more concentration on removing the barriers and the disenablers of access to climate financing built by the least developed countries than what we saw on COP29, especially at those at conflict and climate nexus. It does no good if we pledge 1.3 trillion or 300 billion, and it cannot be accessed easily or in a timely manner to those who need it most. And these are the communities at the heart of all of these difficulties and challenges. And then for us, it's better prepare locally, do a map out of globally who we need to collaborate with. I actually had a debrief with our working group, and they are planning on their work plan for the next year, and engaging the COP would be one key focus area for us as a fora, working together collectively as NGOs, but also seeking out and not only playing the advocacy role, but also ensuring that we're also looking at the accountability role. As I said, the Somali government has now is accessing the green climate finance, the GCF fund. 100 million was announced. How is that actually being developed? What are the skills that we can share? What are the is it reaching the people, the right people? So all of these layers, the last mile is the community, and the community is the most important mile. So making sure that we, as a community, we need to flip that definitely script and put the community at the top, and everybody else works towards addressing that a lot more timely, a lot more efficiently. And I definitely agree with Sapella that cash assistance is one way of getting to communities quite quickly. It gives them dignity, builds agency. They decide where this money goes, where their most need is, rather than us deciding what they're needing. So so we need to be energetic, and we need to, even with the disappointments of this COP in terms of financing, I think there is a lot more opportunities to engage throughout the year in lead up to the COP30, and that will be one key takeaway for us as a fora as well. Back to you.
Thank you so much. That's great and amazing. And I will come back on all the road and all the other engagement that we should have, even if COP is really what we see. There are a lot of different steps on that. So I will come back to that, because I see some questions that come back to that too. Yeah, really, I keep it. But also great that we want to convert at community level. We want to make sure about the accountability of what is there at the moment before going elsewhere. Ari, I come back to you now and to know a bit more how you see, because you were part of it within that. We're hoping that it would conclude something, but also based on the climate finance mechanism. What do you see for COP13 to be better aligned with support the agro industry shift for more sustainable practice, to have more equity and inclusivity of the population, including the smallholder farmer. I think it's something that you specifically work on as Mari, I think.
Yes, thank you, Celine. Yes, yeah, I think the COP30, what we should expect that the climate finance mechanism, with whether they are meager or reasonable, whatever, as of now they are very meager, as we all agree. They must be whatever they must be designed, and they must be designed to address the specific challenges and opportunities within the agriculture, especially resonating with the vulnerabilities and needs of the small farmers who actually suffer the impacts of climate change mostly, especially in the climate hotspots. And a lot of this finance must be focused on regenerative, encouraging and promoting regenerative farming, climate smart technologies, and dedicated funding streams that to prioritize the development of low emissions, climate resilient supply chains, etc. And while minimizing the carbon footprints. And there are a number of practices that are around the world, like we are promoting biochar, application of biochar in the soil to reduce the carbon. So practices like that, many sustainable practices like that, there must be substantial finance must be driven towards those kind of practices, and also there should be sufficient investment on setting standards and so that farmers all over the world adapt to the standard practices. And most importantly, the smallholder farmers in many climate hotspot, and they're actually significant portion of the global agricultural sectors. They often face a lot of barriers to access to climate finance. So we should have a COP30 should focus on setting up proper mechanisms to make sure that the needs of these small farmers are included with simplified application process like adaptation fund and also GCF and GEF. Uh, Many of them are quite cumbersome, and they must be simplified for smaller organizations to be able to access them, and so that these finances are reaching the sustainable farmers easily. And also the current processes are actually quite disincentivizing the smaller NGOs, because they are in the hands of rich and expensive organizations whose actually costs of administration and all that are so high that which that cost we can actually support even a million more farmers. So this this finance there should be sufficient focus on making sure that all these finance mechanisms are substantially localized, of course with definitely with rigorous monitoring processes and all that. So that should be these should be the areas the COP30 should prioritize. Finally, one final point is that climate finance should incentivize actors to adopt sustainable practices through result-based funding subsidies, as I mentioned, for regenerative practices, tax breaks, low carbon initiatives.
Sorry, I think we lose Ari. Yeah, come back. You were wrapping up, Ari, about what farmer can expect, and you were cut a little bit.
Oh, I see. So my last few sentences were that. Okay.
Yeah, you were there.
Yes, I think I can see that internet seems to be unstable. So my last few sentences were that there should be substantial encouragement for sustainable farming practices through incentivizing through mechanisms, and also involving smaller organizations and civil society organizations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and sorry for the tech issue, but great for a thing. Maybe Marie, because we're almost on time, I will come back to you, and for you to also unpack a bit. What are the next step and opportunities that we move toward the next COP? So you already speak about how to go from Baku to Belém. But what we should, as humanitarian development actor, advocate for, engage in by then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I already brought some elements on from Baku to Belém for the finance conversation, but we have all the other conversations that also need to be elevated within the climate space. So in the past, we have had great success with the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund and then its operationalization. And last year, the political signal on the phasing out of fossil fuels. But what we see is that there is also a long overdue fight to be have on land issues. And this is why we also had a conversation between ourselves. Everybody is saying that COP30 will be a lot around indigenous people's rights, fighting back and phasing out industrial agriculture, ending deforestation. All these issues will be, for sure, very prominent. But so far, we don't have a diplomatic confirmation. We don't know where this sense that this will be a priority in Brazil will land in the actual program of COP30, in the actual negotiations, not only in side events and high-level events that don't lead to negotiated outcomes, but are conversations, even if they are very important to be had. So that's my more positive outlook for COP30. And I will leave you with this, that we will intend to have a strong mobilization on what is a just transition for agriculture, for the land sector, and what it means, what we need as a political signal at COP30. Maybe it will be in a cover decision, and we have some language around financing agroecology and strong language on respecting indigenous people's rights and peasants and other people living in rural areas' rights, for example. So all of this needs to be refined. But what I can say for now is that the pressure from below and from grassroots and social movements will be huge. I will paste in the chat a website that was launched during COP29 by the social movements in Brazil. They are already auto-organizing very strongly, and they launched the People's COP30, and they have a vast array of priorities, among which food sovereignty, indigenous people's rights. And so it will be very important to see how also the humanitarian development sectors and the NGOs, let's say, that are not always working very closely with social movements, how we can complement this fight, this alternative COP that will be a huge moment. It's also been a few years since we didn't have the space to have mobilizations outside of COP because of civic space issues. So we can anticipate that the pressure will be high on the outside, and we have to see how, as NGOs working inside COP at the more policy level, we can channel this pressure inside the negotiations and see how it can lead to a negotiated outcome and a strong political signal. So maybe on phasing out industrial agriculture, promoting agroecology, or having a just transition, respecting rights. We will see how and what the political context allow. But this is what I'm looking at for COP30, and I'm very hopeful that we will find meaningful ways to engage and also reclaim this COP space back, not only having to observe the failures of the finance discussion, but also really meaningfully influence the conversation. I'm going to paste the website in the chat for everybody to visit. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's great because we come for your first intervention with something like a bit depressing. And now I feel full of joy, open energy. Thanks to that. It's great to see that maybe the next COP, because I think next one is in Brazil and the one after is Australia. So you will have more space as civil society to work in when you're at COP. But I also get your point about building that, what you're hoping for, that we need to push from now. That is already beginning, thanks to the website that you put online, and we can mobilize right now for having results to the next COP and the one that we will expect and wish for. Thank you for that, Mary. I will come back to you, Isabel, now. Sorry for approximately the same question, but maybe with a bit of different angle that Mary gave. So what's the next step? What the opportunity once again for this COP? What you wish to advocate for in that space?
Thanks, Celine, and thanks, Marie. That was really inspiring and reminding us of the importance and the impact of collective action. And I think that's really also what Nemo was mentioning, and obviously leading an NGO consortium is part of that. And I really strongly believe in that. That's why I so enjoyed working for CALP, and that's why I really enjoy being part of these kinds of initiatives. So I apologize, I'm going to zoom in a little bit again on the case for cash, but maybe beyond loss and damage. But it's my job, so I got to do it. But again, think about this, what we can do collectively. So I really do think, and I'm glad to hear you, Nemo, also kind of backing the case for cash. And I think, it's very complementary with all the initiatives that you're describing, Harry, in terms of transition to more sustainable agroecological practices. But what we've experienced in a lot of the programs that we've implemented is that often, if there are financial barriers to making those to transitioning to different types of practices, then unfortunately we don't get the results that we all hoped for. So I think the two are very much complementary. And looking at the broader climate space and trying to get out of the kind of the silos that are so part of all these discussions and that we know are really not constructive, as Give Directly and as have others, we've proven that the role of large cash transfers, or not just large, but cash transfers in general, in reducing the impact of climatic shocks, in supporting adaptation, and in building resilience. And we have a number of examples of those types of programs, which I'm happy to share. And as you might know, we're really committed to rigorous evidence building. And so, yeah, we have some robust evidence to go with that. But so I think, as we head into COP30, and in the context of grossly inadequate resources, we have a kind of imperative to propose solutions that are as cost efficient and effective as possible. And we need to have that united voice. And so just thinking, because I had the chance to engage quite a lot with members of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage board when I was in Baku, they receive hundreds of case studies and examples being like, do this, do that, look what we've done. And just putting ourselves in their seats, and they're not even necessarily just focused, they're definitely not focused just on loss and damage. They might not even be focused just on climate. They're supposed to make an informed decision on that basis. And I think that's really challenging. And so I think across the whole range of topics and issues and solutions that we've been discussing today, we need to try and have more united voices. And so that's why the principles that we worked on and that I mentioned earlier on, I think were a part of that, right? It's just trying to have a united voice on a particular issue. And actually, with the support of CALP, we'd like to engage anybody interested and people already working cash and or not on, building a bit of consensus around what the use of cash can look like for loss and damage and beyond. So we can share more information about that as the plans come together. Marie, I think it was you who mentioned the operationalization of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and what that would look like. sorry if it wasn't you, but one of you did. I understand that they are going to pilot different disbursement mechanisms in 2025. And so again, what is our collective vision as civil society, as advocates for climate justice in terms of how that should be operationalized? I think, they're meeting this week. I think within the next 2 months is going to be a critical period in terms of influencing that. And the learning from those pilots will then be so influential in terms of the fund going forwards. And then just to pick up on a couple of interventions earlier on fragile and conflict affected states and how do we ensure that climate finance is channeled there. I think a lot of what I heard at COP this year was around anticipatory action and the fact that as humanitarian actors, we need to invest more in this, and especially in fragile and conflict affected states, and investing in early warning systems that can work in such contexts. And at the same time, there was a recognition of the limitations of humanitarian funding in addressing those shocks. So just that, very small amounts of funding. And so I think, and the consequences of this kind of boundary setting and silos. So as a result, there's a massive gap between what communities have requested and what humanitarians can and cannot do. So I think we, as a humanitarian community, we have a responsibility to try and move beyond kind of short-termist basic needs approach to anticipatory action, and collectively make the case that, making one small payment before a shock is not going to be impactful, or not significantly impactful. So can we pilot new models of providing funding before and after a shock? Can we provide larger amounts? Can we learn from this? And obviously, I know this is challenging in a constrained funding environment, but I think ultimately we're providing value for money and better use of resources in the long term. And then, final point, which links to the contributions from Harry and also from Marie on this COP being a biodiversity COP, and focus on indigenous populations and their role in nature and conservation and so on. I think there's some exciting momentum around looking at different mechanisms to finance or channel finance nature and conservation finance to custodians of nature. And we're part of a group which we launched at COP at an event there, looking at conservation basic income, and building a evidence base and kind of practice examples of that. We, as Give Directly, we're doing a pilot of this in Liberia with some Irish aid funding. We're also in discussions with organizations working on new financing models that are emerging, like nature finance models emerging from that are trying to challenge the failings of carbon markets. So anyway, this is a plug for this group. It's got a bunch of researchers, practitioners, campaigners, etc. And all are welcome to join. So if you're interested in ahead of COP30 being able to make this case for conservation basic income, and or unconditional cash for conservation, let's say, let me know and I can share details with you. Thanks.
Amazing. Yeah, please, maybe share what you have again in the chat, just to make sure that everyone gets that. Thank you so much. It was really great. I will not try to wrap up. There are too many things there, but we also have, because the discussion was very lively, and thank you so much for giving us so much insight, etc. We have, I think, a lot of Q&A. So for sake of time, I will let the Q&A session there, even if I also have a lot of them. I don't know, Frances, if you have time to, great, thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Yeah, we've got some really interesting questions coming in on the Q&A. So perhaps a question to Harry. So apart from the advocacy for Indigenous communities that we've heard about from our panelists, what about the other at-risk groups, group advocacy in relation to climate crisis? And are there any attention for groups such as persons with disabilities, women or children? And I think we also had a question come in through the chat around migration as well. So just tying those together.
Thank you, Francis. I think the representation of women groups, apart from the indigenous groups, women groups, children and youth, and it was substantially visible. But impactful, we don't know. I cannot say that they are impactful in terms of influencing the decisions that are taken at the political level. I personally have no evidence to vouch for it, but visibility, yes, that was there. But what was not visible is one constituency, that is older people. I think in COP30 we try to have more discussion on the older people also, because that is also an important constituency where older people are affected by the climate change, and many of us in this group and most of us also will be by 2030 or by 2050 are going to be older, and we are going to be one in every 5 persons on the planet Earth. So that has to be discussed. But in terms of indigenous communities, as I said before, there was a lot of I don't personally like parading in colorful cloths, but not taking any decisions in favor of them. That was I have seen in COP. I've seen in many other COPs also, which was not a good sight for me. And what I would like to see is a more substantial, favorable decisions taken at the political level and reflected on the draft policies. That was not there. So as for COP30, I think we'll continue to have a robust representation of other risk groups like older communities, women and children and disabled groups. And we also hope that there will be political level decisions that are taken to make sure that the climate finances and climate policies really benefit them. Thank you. And on the migration part, I have actually posted my answer in the question and answers. If you want me to express that, I will do it. But I posted my answer there.
I think that's great. We also have some answer type. If it's not clear enough, please resend question. Feel free to do that. Michael, do you have question from your part?
No, nothing much really. I think there is a questions on specifically to a specific region, especially around financing element of it. But I guess that may need further discussions in terms of on the specificities of a regional specific financing discussions apart from what was discussed already.
Okay, that's great. I definitely have a question that coming again. I see we have also some questions in the chat that we need to see. If you want also to have a live question, raise your hand. My colleague Michael will try to, and Reina will try to give you the mic to have something a more lively discussion directly with the panelists. I've seen quite a lot of questions of either how to engage in the COP directly, but maybe can you all of us give us tips, because we were sharing that we have a lot of opportunity during the year to engage, to do more, to support more. Do you have any tips? I don't know, Nimo, Isabel, Ari. I know that Mari is already gone, but she's part of the Climate Action Network. We can be something that we join to really make us hear how we can raise the voice of NGOs that are not accredited at the COP.
Maybe maybe I can go first and maybe talk about the Somali specific one. As I was saying, we have a working group under the Somali NGO Consortium umbrella, and it's on climate, it's on resilience. And it initially was open to just members, but now we've expanded it for anybody who is working on climate and having climate conversation can join, share their learning, share their experience, what works well, where, because even within the countries, we have diverse settings, diverse challenges, different challenges. So it doesn't mean that just because you work in one side of the country that you know that you have the same experience, you have the same shared experiences. So I think this is one of the reasons why we opened up the platform. We've also opened up the platform to UN agencies who also are working on because I felt like we were all having different conversations even within the country. So the silos is not just at the global level, but even within our own network, we're having these silo conversations. So we expanded and opened this to everybody. We have a local and an INGO chairing. So when I was briefing them this morning, it was important for us to sort of identify, do a plan of action. What do we need to do where? Who do we need to seek out in terms of either getting the knowledge or the capacity or having a shared messaging and shared agenda points. We have the academia, we have the private sector. Like I said, the climate conversation has become quite prominent in Somalia. It's important to the Somali government. So those conversations will certainly continue, and we need to position ourselves internally on how who is best placed to say what, and who do we need to put. Like, we're not political, right? We're not political, but we have political organizations who are members of the network. So as humanitarians, we might not engage the political conversation so openly. We might, provide support from the backgrounds. We might do closed-door diplomacy, but there are organizations who are mandated to do this, who have this mandate, who have this vision. So how do we support them to take and carry our message to do the political influence that's needed? Same with the finance, same with the technology and innovation. So I think for us, it's really important to map that out. And then we were part of the Africa Summit last year, September last year, if I'm not mistaken, the climate summit that happened in Nairobi. Again, how do we engage the regional structures that are there? How do we engage the IGAD in the region? And then coming back to the global, where do we position ourselves as civil society, as NGOs, as mainly focused on humanitarian, but we do have a lot of NGOs who are multi-hatted, triple-hatted, who are doing development work, who are doing reconciliation and peace building. We have NGOs who are focused on governance. So I think it's just making sure that we are connecting with the right people at the right place. But for us to be able to do that, we need to have this plan, we need to map out and then seek out where do we actually do the influencing. We're signatory to the climate charter. How do we ensure that we are reflecting back to what we all committed in the climate charter, and how do we hold our governments accountable to include, and Harry, you're absolutely right, a lot of these, or whoever asked the question, a lot of these within the vulnerabilities, within the marginalized communities, you have minority communities who are further marginalized. Those are people with disabilities. There is, in the Somali context, is the clan, the various different clans who are marginalized. So it's the youth, I don't think we even talk about the elderly at all. So I think it's also ensuring that how do we put these specific communities who need specific needs to the forefront of our conversations. And I think we can only do that if we have that conversation and if we have a proper analysis on where our powers lie, where our strengths lie, who has the power on what, and then how do we connect with those. So this is something definitely that I would be focusing next year, and our working group will be focused in having that mapping conversation so we know what we need to do when. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Nimo. I don't know, Isabel, if you want to come on the same thing on how to engage more, what we can do by next one. I know that Mary have speaking several. So Nimo, you have this working group open to everyone from the Somali Consortium. I think Mary speak quite a lot of this Baku to Belém roadmap that is led by the Climate Action Network. So Climate Action Network will definitely go and support them, being part of them, even if you are not going to the COP per se. They are mostly working all year long directly, mostly for Bonn, but also directly with different negotiators throughout the year, part of the Sherpa, trying to influence them. I know that Isabel, you're also suggesting to do some collaborative work, and there are also 2025 is the year of NDC for every country. So it's a nationally determined contribution. So it's super important. If you are engaged at country level, it can be a good way to enter all the discussion around climate, what to do, etc. You have a lot of organizations that are already part of them. So if you need, we can put you in touch with the ones that are already in those space if you want to go that, because it's negotiation next year and it will be for the next 5 years. It's a bit like, yeah, it will set the point of what's going on at country level on the measures climate change. And Isabel, I'm giving back to you if you want to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I covered it quite a bit in my second intervention, but just thinking about well, you know, for us, but Give Directly, it's a strong focus on the fund for responding to loss and damage and how that evolves over the next few months and how these pilots work out. And I think like having, you know, my understanding is at this board meeting that's happening right now, there's going to be a little bit more articulation on what the operational mechanisms will look like for dispersing that fund. And then I think it's our collective responsibility to be able to say, okay, this is how this would be our, you know, our vision for how the fund disbursement mechanisms could be piloted, or like, you know, what we think quality community access could look like now that they've defined, you know, broad modalities for it. The role, you know, as I was mentioning, for us, it would be like the role that the cash can play within that, and, you know, really making the case for that both through social protection systems and in parallel. So I think it's not definitely not about creating a new platform. I think it's more like for those of us who are working on certain thematics to be aligned on those, and then use a multitude of existing influential, you know, channels, can definitely being one of them, the loss and damage collaboration being another, looking at, you know, who is really kind of involved in the, like, as civil society members in the negotiations at Bonn, etc., and make sure that we're consistent in our messaging. So that's, I think, what we'll be doing as Give Directly, and what I would hope to collaborate with other NGO and UN peers on. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, it's happening. Sorry, thank you, Isabel. I think, and I see in the chat that we answer a bit about what was the question about, so that's great. Of course, it doesn't mean that we don't have to think about ourselves. Definitely, CALP Network, Climate Charter, Secretariat. I think DECO is also thinking about that. Not working to speak on your name, Frances, but definitely we may come back to you, part of the community of practice, to see what you're expecting from us to do more to help on the collective part. So yes, we will stay in touch. Do you have other question unanswered? I'm sorry.
Anyone want to raise their hand at this point? I think that's all from the Q&A.
Great. I see one question about, I think, I'm sorry, I lost it because it's part of the chat, but someone was not able to access the Q&A due to tech issue. It was something about migration. I think, Ari, you mentioned that a little bit. Do you want to come back on that?
No, I think I have nothing more to add on that, Ashish. I think many others may have any responses on that. I think that the question was about how migration was discussed, and so I think this IOM has conducted some special sessions on that. And also because some of the important discussions were not finalized. So this issue was not fully addressed. That's what my impression is, but I would welcome other interventions on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ari. Anyone do want to speak or interact about the migration issue and how it has been tackled and discussed during the COP? Yeah. No, if not, you can refer. I think I will try to find the link with a very complete document part of the climate chapter website to try to review a bit all the key decision on that. So definitely not especially on the lost and damaged fund discussion, but it has been part of a certain discussion, as Ari say. As there are no more specific question running through, and that we are almost on time, I will give a few minutes to all of the panelists, maybe to wrap up the session, if they want to share anything more, or just what struck you during the discussion. What is your hope? Again, I think it's important for us to go forward that, and we will close that webinar after you. So, Ari, I see that you are unmuted. So if you want to go first, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Celine. I think it was a wonderful discussion and a lot of positivity in this panel members, and a lot of concrete information on how a lot of decisions that are taken are going to be implemented, what is happening now. So now, actually, my final words would be that as a civil society, I think we should be more unified more unified and more collective as we go to COP30, and we should actually break silos, and we should bring all interests together, all vulnerable groups and communities together, and we should have a robust representation as one civil society. And as earlier mentioned by Mary, that uh, we should have a very good collaboration with in COP30, the local activist movements, and so that we are able to have a good ground strength there. That was lacking in Azerbaijan because of the nature of governance there. And in Azerbaijan, the civil society voices were strived. There was no interaction with, not enough interaction with groups in Azerbaijan, with the groups that have arrived from different parts of the world. It's important to have this conversation with the local groups. I think in Brazil, probably we will not face that issue. And another important thing that as we go on, I would say is that in order to make sure that the representation from simple people, simple communities like indigenous communities and others is robust and is strong, I think what we should also advocate as a civil society, that the Brazil, the COP30 presidency should make sure that the COP30 will be affordable for everyone, unlike COP29 and COP28, where in COP29, I have gathered some intelligence that the presidents and the local Azerbaijan government has deliberately hiked the prices of everything, that they told establishments in Baku that you must hike the hotel costs, rates, food costs, and everything. And at COP29 event also, some of the African groups have made a very powerful posts that how difficult it was for them to buy even a cup of coffee at COP29. I think if we don't address as a collectively, if we are not able to address these issues, and we are not doing justice to the communities that we are representing, this should be in our agenda. If we want the COP30 or future COPs to represent sufficiently the civil society and simple people, all communities, vulnerable people, that we must make sure that these issues are also on the agenda, that the cost of participation must be controlled. And in the end, that the money that everyone is spending is also again the taxpayers' money, and we are not being accountable and justifying to these donations that we get, and that will help us to participate in all these events. I would say I will just I'm talking somewhat different things, but I thought it's important for us to focus. I will just make one mention that, for instance, my 12 days of participation at COP29 with limited outcome at the political level actually can light one Somalian village for 365 days, I can say that. So this is the level of this expensive that COPs are becoming. And I would say that it is not without a reason that ex-UNSG like Ban Ki-moon and many other about 200 top experts and right-minded thinkers, they have appealed that COP process to be reformed, that so that it becomes much more effective and much more democratic and much more accessible to communities, and they take decisions which are much more democratic and also representative of the vulnerable communities. So we must, as a civil society, we just not only should not get carried away with the agenda set by the COP secretariats, we should also push these agendas into the system, and we must all should fight for reforming this whole COP processes so that they become more effective in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari, for all your steps. Isabel, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll just keep it brief. I mean, I admire your ambition, Harry, in terms of reforming the whole process. And, you know, it was my first COP, and one of the analogies that I used to describe it to people is like, if you were an alien coming to planet Earth and you thought, wow, your planet is burning, and is this the best system you've designed to be able to collectively address this? You'd, yeah, clearly be a little shocked. This is what we've come up with. So agree with you on that vision. In terms of what we can influence in the meantime, it feels to me like maybe this, you know, aligning around the Baku to Belém roadmap and making that something where, and I don't, you know, again, there's so many kind of different convenings and groups driving different things, but at least having like a collective set of kind of clear messages on behalf of like those of us in this group and these constituencies and beyond, but like what we would want to see in that roadmap. I think, you know, if we're all able to articulate the same 5 top messages or something, I think it would make our advocacy a lot more effective. And I think what struck me at COP was there were so many really compelling individual stories of loss, or of, you know, innovative solutions, etc. But they were just sort of drops in the ocean of noise. And unless there's like, you know, some coherent kind of messaging and drivers, but like, coherent asks that kind of link to all of that, it just becomes kind of more of the same and without much clarity. And so I think we can all do better to use an imperfect process to influence more effectively.
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, hoping that it will be heard and we do picture for next one. Any more? What are you going to come?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for convening this webinar. Honestly, it's been so interesting for me to hear all the different various voices, and not everything that I was exposed to even within being in COP, because you're so focused on getting, you know, the issues that you represent more than, and not spreading yourself so thin, because it is a jungle. This is my second one. And Dubai, even, you had to walk, you know, so far apart between at least in the advantage of Baku was it was all in one space, so easy to walk, even though navigation, I'm sure health-wise, wasn't so great as well, because you couldn't see. You go in the morning, you come out at night, and you're thinking, where did the day go? So the logistics are always problematic, and I definitely agree about the cost and the fact that we're talking about communities and countries who are left behind, but then we're not even, there isn't even the enabling factor for them to attend and participate meaningfully. So I think I definitely underline that about the cost. It was really quite high. Like we had to question how it was going to be me and another colleague. So in the end, it had to be one person going because of the cost. And not that we didn't have the funding, we had some funding, but to me, it was immoral. Like, well, why would we spend that much time for something that has a very little impact immediately after your attendance? So I think it's important for us to question that as well. I mean, I remember talking to some other colleagues who were there, and they were talking about their costs of hotels costing over 100,000 USD, and I'm thinking, whoa, I think you should have made a different decision for that. But anyway, that is something. Engage in the process, and it being extremely political, of course, doesn't help together. But maybe one key message that I would want to leave with us is, I think we as civil society need to organize ourselves much better in country. And I also think the civil society institutions and organizations in the West, in the countries where we want them to pay the ones who owe debt on climate, I think they need to organize themselves a lot more to push their countries and push their governments to honor and push for that climate justice that we need to see. And then how do we collaborate as a global South and global North? Civil society, how do we better collaborate? And I think that's something that you spoke to, Isabel, in how do we ensure that we are coherent and concrete in our messaging, and it doesn't get lost in between all of these different. And then the last thing would be, how do we support the negotiators? I think the negotiators from the least developed countries in Africa, definitely, they were a lot more stronger. They were a lot more stronger in their negotiation, in their pushback. But were they listened to? This is the question. You can be strong, you can be advocating, you could be shouting from the top of your head, but if you're not being listened to, that's a different story. But then how do we utilize the private sector? How do we utilize the global North networks and processes and civil society to ensure that we're carrying this message together and that we are pushing for change? We find these governments find money to fund wars, but they cannot find money to support people's lives and livelihoods who have no or very least contribution to the state of the climate. That is the bottom line question. Back to you, and thank you very much for convening us.
Thank you so much for being part of that. It was so insightful and great. Frances, do you want to offer one of the last words?
Yeah, thank you, Celine. I know we're at time, but just very briefly, just a huge thank you to our panelists. That was just like really riveting and so many insights. And I heard really some very clear messages that this COP has been a real disappointment, even a betrayal. But despite this disappointment, we did see more humanitarian and civil society visibility. So that's something to be hopeful for. And as we move towards COP30, we really need to better organize ourselves, and all our efforts need to converge at the community level. And the financial mechanisms really need to be substantially localized. So I think one approach is going to be mapping out and seeking out where we can influence, where we do the influencing, and linking also to the commitments of the Charter in that. And to build coalitions and speak even louder in an aligned and robust way. So yeah, I just want to end with a big thank you to our excellent panelists, and to Celine as well for her excellent moderation. And thank you all for attending as well. And I really hope that this is the start of more joined up conversations between the CULT network and the Climate Environment Charter and DC, because it's been a really, I think, valuable space to think about how we move forward collectively. Back to you, Celine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Nothing from my end, as someone who has not been to any COP, this webinar has been truly helpful. No, lots of insights. I felt the emotions. No, and I think that is very important. Without being there, I think that we all agree to the message of the failures of COP29 and the successes, although a bit small, but we do understand that we should not be, and that our advocacy should not end with the outcomes of the COP29. I hear that we need to be better organized ourselves in preparation for the COP30, and we need more collaborations now. And I hope that collaboration starts tomorrow, as we prepare for next for the next COP, and maybe as a way to help that process. We in COP will definitely continue the discussions with our communities of practice on cash and climate and CVA, and we look forward to more collaborations with DC, with the Climate Charter, and hopefully we will have more participations and collaborations, especially with the local partners and local actors in country, so that we can collaborate more and think of how can we better organize ourselves in the next COP to come. But with that, I would like to thank you, everyone. The recordings of this webinar will be shared later on, and then feel free to access our websites to gather more information and more activities to come in the next coming months. But again, thank you very much, everyone, and we wish you a very good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.